I think I have a werewolf or dogman ancestor. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I am currently an 18-year-old man living in Wisconsin who has reason to wonder if something about my personal biology or history might be different from most people. I am strongly suspecting that I might have blood of a different kind of human flowing through my veins. I wonder if my current symptoms, which I will describe to you, are as far as this phenomenon will go in terms of its physical manifestation, or if possibly this might get far more pronounced than it already is today. What I'm hinting around about is that I'm genuinely wondering if I might be partly some other kind of creature, like a werewolf or a dogman. It's hard to explain, since I have to admit I'm not even sure what a lot of the vocabulary means, as these words seem to be used in different ways by different people. So I guess first I should choose definitions for words, then I can at least express my opinions, even if I turn out to be wrong. So let's define a werewolf as something a human transforms into part-time. It's not an animal so much as it is the expression of an affliction or a curse. At the same time, it functions as a specific physical being during the time it exists. It may as well be a werewolf all the time to you if you run into one in the woods at night. A dogman, on the other hand, would be something that looks a lot like what people sometimes call werewolves, or loup-garou and so on. But a dogman? A dogman is always a dogman. It doesn't change back into a human being when the full moon is over. Now, assuming dogmen are real, that doesn't mean they can interbreed with humans. Whatever is happening to me now has something to do with a recessive or leftover gene from one of my ancestors, so this has to have come from some kind of a human. Could dogman actually be biologically human? And could I be descended from one? My parents are not much help. My mother humored me at first by taking me around to visit elderly relatives who still had photos of people from previous generations. They all thought I was a little batty to be looking for people back then who had very thick eyebrows. You see, I'm the only one currently alive in our family with thick eyebrows. They meet in the middle. Nobody else has anything like that going on. My mother's mother is the only one who understood why I would be wondering about this, and she told me that in fact her mother, who would have been my great-grandmother, indeed had a unibrow. She found 2 surviving photos of the woman, but in those photos she does not have a unibrow. Grandma said she would pull the hairs out, and they would grow back in, only to be pulled out again. She would watch her mother groom her eyebrows at least once a month, as the hair somehow always came back again. So at least I wasn't adopted. There was at least one person I was related to who might have had a similar situation to my own. The other thing is, with me, when I got chest hair as a teenager, it wasn't the same as what happened with my friends. Like with me, I would wake up hairy one day, then be hairy for a few days. With thick arm hair, chest hair, and back hair that was really itchy under my clothing. But then 3 or 4 days later, I would wake up without this condition. I mean, I didn't go back to looking prepubescent, but I was not walking around looking like a Bigfoot either. It took a few months before I got the nickname the werewolf at school. This kid that hates me noticed that my hair grew all over when it was the full moon, which had completely escaped me. I never paid attention to the cycles of the moon before, but I sure do now. I tried using Nair, that hair removal cream, on the morning of the full moon, which did take it all off my arms, chest, and back. Even while still traveling to school, though, it started growing back, which was quite uncomfortable under my shirt. Hair should not really be able to grow as fast as that. Also, another question I have is, on the first morning after the full moon, when my body hair returns to normal, where does all that excess hair go to? It's not like I shed it all over the bed, it's just not there any longer. Grandma never told me about her mother having those sorts of problems, but then again, my great-grandmother was obviously female, and maybe this syndrome just doesn't manifest as strongly in females as in males. So when I started to look things up on the internet and educate myself with what hearsay exists about this kind of thing, I happened upon a story that I am now learning is famous. I only learned about this recently myself, but I would imagine that most of you watching this channel would probably already be familiar with it. Apparently, in 1936, a gentleman known as Mark Shackleman saw a dogman, or a werewolf-type creature, on 2 occasions. It seemed to be digging in an ancient burial mound, and it vocalized something to the surprised man. The creature looked human enough that Shackleman assumed the vocalizations were some kind of language, not merely the noises produced by a large animal trying to scare off another large animal. But the most surprising part of the story to me was the location. Racine, Wisconsin. Now, I grew up near the Johnson Park Golf Course and those little dog park areas that are listed as being in Racine, even though they are actually not attached to Racine at all. They are north and west of the city, but are claimed by Racine and taxed and maintained as part of Racine and so forth. At any rate, that werewolf or dogman story from 1936 happened just to the south of where my family lived until I was 12. We had been in that house for 3 generations too, since it was built in 1926 or 27. For all I know, that dogman was one of my own ancestors digging up that mound. And for all I know, that'll be me in a few years, out digging up graves under the full moon. My father took me to a doctor who told us both that it was just me growing up. He wasn't listening to either of us. He had decided before meeting us that we were both hysterical. When we foolishly told my mom what the doctor said, she refused to allow my father to take me to any other doctors, and instead, she took me to a shrink. He put me on meds that make it hard to focus. They also made it impossible to keep seeing my girlfriend for reasons that are too personal to relate here. I feel increasingly isolated by so many aspects of this situation. The drugs make it harder to figure out what I should be doing, and they do nothing to stop the hair from growing out again each month. When I try to show my mother what is actually happening to me, she refuses to look. She starts crying, saying my boy has gone insane and things like that. And she goes online to play the victim on social media with her friends. Sons becoming werewolves, mothers most affected. She's got dad completely under control because he stupidly lets her manage the bank account. She says he isn't mature enough with money to handle the income that he earns and gives to her. He just lets her do this. So my physical problem is being treated as a mental problem, and the changes happening to my body each month are completely denied by everyone around me. I've lost a lot of respect for my parents through this. Dad knows that what she's doing is wrong, but he's too weak to stop her. And she is so deep up inside her own celebration of her amazingness that she can't even see how she's making my life so much harder. She isn't being evil on purpose. She just can't take her eyes off her own reflection long enough to understand the outside world. If I really am becoming a werewolf, then I guess this is sort of a true diary of a teenage werewolf. I mean, maybe I really am a werewolf already. I don't think I've left my room at night though, so I probably am not. But I think it's become time to video record myself at night during the full moon, don't you? I've been in negotiations with a friend who has 2 nice cameras with night vision on them. If I can get clearance to go sleep over his place for a couple or 3 nights during the next full moon, he's saying he can film me to see if anything interesting is happening at nights that I'm just not remembering the next morning. There's some roadblocks though. He wants me to put up the cash money to replace the cameras beforehand, because I guess he thinks I'm going to turn into a monster and destroy all his expensive equipment. I'm saying we can put the cameras in places that a werewolf wouldn't even notice them, assuming I even become a werewolf. I know the hair growth spurts and the return to normal happen when I'm asleep, so I'd like to get some clear footage of exactly how all that goes down. I mean, I just don't understand what's happening, and it seems like I'm on top of the need-to-know list about what is happening. By the way, don't look for us in Racine. We moved out in 2016. The people where we live now talk about Bigfoot a lot, but not dogmen or werewolves, really. Well, actually, I guess there is some dogman chatter, but a lot more about the Sasquatch. The only werewolf people around here talk about is me, unfortunately, so I better not tell you where we are right now. I don't really want my neighbors to know that the werewolf kid is actually genuinely wondering if he might really be a werewolf in an actual sense. I would rather believe that these are just some recessive genes expressing themselves, and I'm quite frustrated to be getting drugged and gaslit about my own physical condition. I'm sure there is some doctor out there somewhere who knows exactly what I'm going through, and possibly he or she might also know how to mitigate these symptoms. Maybe we can arrest, or even reverse, this condition. That won't ever happen as long as I'm being punished, drugged, and silenced for even being honest about what's happening to me. I mean, what if I do eventually become some kind of monster or monstrous beast? What if that's happened already? I can't be responsible for whatever might happen in such a circumstance, but that's why I'm trying to be responsible for what I can do now. If I'm just to be labeled a nutcase, then eventually something terrible is gonna happen. Why allow that possibility when we could have someone look into it and examine what's really happening to me now, before it becomes too late? I need to get out on my own, so I can get away from my mother and her doctors. I need to be able to think straight and get off these meds, not necessarily in that order. I mean, it's time for me to grow up, not time for me to descend into a stupor. If I don't act soon, I may become something that does something terrible. And this is all because I think I have a dogman or werewolf ancestor. The dogman used the rock as a tool. Dear Scary Stories NYC, when I was a kid many years ago, they taught me that human intelligence was connected directly to tool use, which was connected directly to the thumbs. Since then, they've discovered tool use among all sorts of creatures, even crows. Turns out it's not that important to have a thumb, or even a very large brain, in order to find an animal using tools. I bet you'd find paramecia utilizing items floating in their environment as tools if you looked long enough. I think it's probably more common than the scientists of previous generations ever might have guessed. What does all this have to do with the dogman? Well, my wife and I both saw dogman using items in his environment as tools. Were we impressed with his intelligence at the time? Hard to say, since he was using all of that intelligence in the pursuit of violence. We were scared out of our wits. Does that count any toward being impressed? So we literally saw this monster on Lover's Lane, because there's an actual street where we live called Lover's Lane. Ironically, there aren't really many good places to park and make out on Lover's Lane in Montclair, PA. There are two creepy cemeteries, the B'nai Jacob, which is back in the woods and you can't really see it from the road, and then there's this other one that I don't even know the name of over there. Sometimes we would call it Lover's Lane Cemetery, and other times we'd call it the Pitcher's Mound Graveyard because of the weird way it has a road going around that central cross monument. If you come around across the street from the cemetery under these trees at the edge of the forest, you'll see that there's some grass there for you to park on, where most of the time, at least back in our day, we'd be left alone at night by people driving by. There usually isn't a whole lot of traffic over there by the cemetery at night, but Sometimes the police do come around and make you turn the engine back on and get back to driving. The one time I wished I could find a cop over there, though, none were to be found. So Nancy wasn't my wife yet. This was back when she was still crazy about me. We both had a hard time finding any privacy in those days, but when we did, Nancy was all over me full time. That was why I was the first to notice the weird thumping sound. I could feel it underneath us, before I think I was even hearing it with my ears. I didn't actually see the dogman until it was already halfway across the cemetery, running toward us. Okay, rewind a bit. What I saw was a big football player of a silhouette running toward us through the cemetery really fast, as though he had just robbed a bank, and the cops were right behind him catching up. The night was bright enough that I could see an absolutely insane face on that guy. I made Nancy look, which was quite difficult to do, but when she saw what was heading our way, she immediately began screaming at me to get back in the driver's seat. So I had my underpants on when I climbed over back into the driver's seat. Nancy was still in the back getting dressed when the creature caught up to us and pounded on the hood. This thing was acting like it knew who we were, and like it had an extremely serious grudge against us. I couldn't stop staring at the thing, as it seemed so completely impossible to see. I eventually had to stop looking at it, and instead looked at my hand, turning the key in the ignition. I kept somehow not starting the car. I had become completely uncoordinated, out of fear. Here's what I remember seeing when I was staring, though. Nancy has added one small detail into this, but the rest are things I remember noting at the time. So, this very much seemed like a human in a lot of ways, including the basic bodily movements. That having been said, the head and personality reminded me of canines I had seen when they were going out of control. I once saw a guard dog flip out on a poor mailman. The guy could have been killed if the owner hadn't gotten there in time to pull the dog off. This creature was like that one, extremely agitated and angry, far beyond any normal level of being ticked off. I mean, it saw us and ran a long distance across all that cemetery to get at us. I don't understand what it was about us that was so abhorrent to the beast. This was one big SOB. It stood taller than any man I'd ever seen, so I don't think it was actually a human being at all. I think it was some kind of a canine that evolved to walk upright and only looked like a human. What would they call that? Parallel evolution? Probably something like that. In the case of this guy, his ability to stand on his hind legs allowed his front legs to evolve into arms. It allowed his front paws to evolve into these claws that were more like hands than paws. He wasn't really any kind of man, but he was a dog who had the ability to do many of the things that humans do. If you act like a human, you'll start to look like one too. Not that this creature's head looked human in any way. That was purely feral, entirely canine. This was a giant dog head, like something out of prehistory. It was oversized in all ways, including the long teeth and tall, upright ears. It was real, but nothing about it looked possible. It was as big as a bear, and I mean a big bear, like a brown bear, not a black bear. At the same time, the build was something more like a dog, nothing like a bear at all. It was thin around the waist and wide around the chest. Its legs looked muscular enough to lift a bank vault, and it was able to walk, stand, or run with grace, balance, and strength quite easily. The legs almost looked like precision hydraulic equipment. They moved so perfectly as to almost seem like a living machine. When it would scream and drool would fly, though, I was quickly reminded that this was no automaton. This was one of the most vicious and freaked out carnivores in all of Pennsylvania. So after pounding on the hood and barking at us in his way that sounded almost like human language, the dog-headed wild man, or feral canine, or whatever it was, retreated and began looking around on the ground. When it came up, it did so with rocks in both hands. First it threw a rock right-handed, which bounced off the roof. Then it threw one left-handed, which hit near the center of my windshield, causing a spiderweb crack that looked almost like a bullet had hit the glass. Nancy was screaming so loud that she actually got my attention. It took me a while to understand that she was telling me to please drive. That was a good idea, I thought. I should drive. Driving would make things better. I agreed with Nancy, so the next thing I had to do was stare down at my hands and feet and remember what each of them was supposed to do in order for us to drive out of there. I was seriously that spaced in that moment. I think I just wanted to take a nap on the spot. I didn't want to be part of reality just then in that moment. So I pulled the car forward back toward the road, and I heard a terrible sound that I'd never heard before. Somehow I knew it was that dogman scratching up my old car's exterior, even before I turned to see exactly that. Nancy was as amazed as she was terrified. Wide-eyed, she told me that the beastman picked up a pointed stone off the ground and used the sharp point in the stone to scratch the side of the car doors. As I drove away, accelerating as I went, that dogman ran along Nancy's side of the car, scratching the side again and again. Finally, he was unable to continue keeping up the pace, and he fell back. Nancy just kept repeating to me that the animal man had used that rock as a tool. I acknowledged her and agreed over and over again, but she would only repeat herself with even more emphasis all over again after that. She seemed to be in possession of an overabundance of meaning, but she was at a loss for words. When we got back to my place, my parents didn't even have a chance to criticize me for getting the car scratched up. Nancy launched into this story about how a dog-headed monster had come out with a chisel and carved satanic messages into the side of the car. It just looked like random scratches to me, but she was really hyped up. She insisted the car should be sold, and in fact we did scrap it soon afterward. The cost of fixing or replacing the scratched up doors would have cost almost as much as just getting another used car. We couldn't get much for it, but with it gone, Nancy calmed down and stopped yelling about the devil and all that sort of stuff. Eventually I got better work, and then we got married. That meant no more fooling around and parking over on Lover's Lane. But we still have a rare need to drive through over there, and each time we do, Nancy moves a little closer to me on the seat, and I pay extra attention to everything going on around us. This is because we both still remember the night when we noticed that Dogman used the rock as a tool. Our executive producer is CS, head and shoulders above the rest. I'm not talking about any old loser. CS is today's executive producer. Please join us in thanking CS for making this episode possible. YouTube has openly admitted that fewer advertisers are paying top dollar to advertise like they used to, and they're advertising less. That means we don't get the better ads as often or at all, and our revenue has suffered drastically. YouTube also has less motivation to drive traffic to us for this reason as well. Things haven't been easy, as this is happening to a lot of other channels like us. So far, we've been weathering this storm through merch sales of t-shirts and mugs in our store, and also through direct donations from kind philanthropists like CS. People can either donate to us using PayPal or by using our new thanks button, which is under every video. You can also join our PayPal or channel membership clubs and get perks in return, like secret episodes and advanced previews. Here to explain it all in greater detail is our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank? Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that when it cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.